But what had hit me? If it hadn't come into the light? I looked down, and lying at my feet was a single hiking boot. I glanced back up toward the thing. It hadn't moved. It was just there, watching me. I looked back at the boot, which wasn't in the best shape. The fabric was torn, and it was caked in reddish-brown mud. Hang on, I thought, stooping to pick it up. I shifted it closer to the fire for a closer look. Blood. The boot was caked in dried blood. My head swam, and a fire tore through my nerves. The back of my neck pricked madly, and my skin turned goose flesh. I found myself on one knee, breathing heavily as I mumbled, "Oh no, oh no." I looked back up towards the thing, which still hadn't moved. I stood and screamed at it. "What do you want with me?" It didn't answer. I dropped the boot. I jumped as there was a small pop from one of the branches in the fire, but was suddenly struck with an idea. I moved closer to the fire and spotted a branch that had only had one end alight. I pulled it from the blaze and turned to face the thing. It growled again as I held up the branch, which rose to more of a snarl when I threw it towards it. The blazing stick lit up the night as it tumbled through the air towards the thing, and a horrified thrill ran up my spine as I caught a better glimpse of the outline of it, just for a second, before it scuttered away from the light. It was huge, big as a bear, but without any of the mass. Lean, opposed to bulky. It was dark, so dark that it seemed to flow and bend into the gloom behind it. It had 4 long legs attached to an almost stumpy torso, but it hadn't used all 4 when it moved. It used the front ones to push itself upright onto the back legs and then dance madly away on those while its whole body and arms jerked from side to side. God, it was so tall, maybe 8 feet high when it moved on its back legs, and it never seemed to get fully upright. The things that glinted in the firelight did seem to be its eyes, and the split-second glimpse of its face I caught was enough to make me take a step back in horror. It almost looked human. Human, but definitely wrong. Like if you took a person's face and stretched it forward so it was long, like a horse's head. The mouth, though, it wasn't small like a horse. It stretched all the way back to where the face met the rest of the skull. The mouth was stuffed full of far too many rotten-looking teeth, stained red in places. I think my legs gave way then. I found myself sitting on the ground, hugging my knees and rocking back and forth. What in the hell was that thing? And what did it want with me? The blood-stained boot didn't exactly fill me with hope that it was friendly. I used a shaking hand to grab more sticks out of the woodpile and feed the campfire. Whatever that thing was, it hadn't come into the lights. It had moved away when the fire came near it. I gave a silent thanks to whatever urge had me drag in as much wood as I had. The eyes had stopped moving again, and it seemed the thing was content for the time being just to sit in the dark and stare at me. I stared right back, trying to think of what the hell I was going to do, and we stayed like that for a while, looking at each other. Somewhere not too far away, a coyote howled. The eyes turned and bobbed back and down, slightly in the direction of the howl. Was it sniffing the air? It turned back to face me, and it grunted? Whatever the noise was, it sounded dissatisfied somehow. The thing turned away, and I saw the bare smudge of an outline moving off into the dark towards the howls. Within seconds it was gone from sight. and as it faded from the view, so did its stench. I sat there, frozen for a moment, and then burst upwards, boots scraping for grip as the loose gravel came to my feet. I frantically grabbed the pack and swung it onto one shoulder, stooped up to pick up my rifle, swung that by its strap onto the other shoulder, and then hesitated, torn by indecision. Dare I risk it? I clenched my jaw and tried to swallow down the rinsing sense of fear. I picked up one foot and took a single step away from the fire, wincing as the gravel crunched underfoot, which seemed deafeningly loud as the silence that was broken only otherwise by the fire. I peered around, muscles tensing with anticipation, but saw no sign of the thing. I took another step. The gravel crunched again. Still no sign of it. I relaxed ever so slightly, took a deep breath, and started briskly walking towards the trail. Once I hit it, I could turn right, and was confident enough I could follow it back to the parking lot, even in the dark. I'd taken no more than a half-dozen hurried steps when I stopped dead, frozen in place. I could smell it again, the reek bringing the bile up in my throat. Heart racing, I turned my head slightly to the left and saw that glint in the dark. The light from the fire had dimmed as I moved away from it, but I was still just close enough for me to see that familiar reflection of the flames in its eyes again. A rumble came up from the darkness. A growl? I slid my front foot backwards, slowly moving back towards the fire, never taking my eyes off where it seemed to be in the dark. I rinsed the fireside and slid my pack and rifle off my shoulders, laying them on the ground and sitting down next to them. As I did, I heard the coyote howl again. The thing seemed to grunt, and then it faded into the darkness as it turned away from me. What the hell was I going to do? It was like the thing was playing with me, but I wasn't going to risk making a run for it again. No way did I want it to catch me in the dark. The darkness had seemed to kill my phone and flashlight when I settled in, and any flaming torch from the fire it took would burn out well before I made it back to my car. I still had my lighter, but there was no way that'd make enough of a difference to keep it away. The coyote began to howl once more, but the howl cut off quickly, turning into a snarl. I listened closely as the snarls became pains and then desperate yelps, and held my breath as they cut off, replaced by the sound of something snapping, crunching, and splattering. I breathed deeply, listening as I tried to slow my hammering heart down. Nothing. Once again, all I could hear was the crackling of the fire. I shut my eyes, listening harder, and shrieked as something hit the ground next to me, scrabbling backwards on my butt, away from it, waiting for it to leap up and grab me. I'd gotten a few yards away when I stopped scrabbling, and just sat there hyperventilating, staring at the ruined pile of gray fur and red gore that lay in front of me. It was the coyote. Or what was left of the coyote. It was a mess. It looked like every bone in its body had been pulverized, and its front legs were completely missing. But raggedly missing, like they'd been torn away, rather than being cleanly cut off or bitten off. Worst of all, its head was facing the wrong way, twisted around until it was entirely backwards, blood seeping from the open mouth, collecting into drops that hit each dusty gravel with a soft splat. I shuddered, and hugged my knees tight, rocking back and forth slightly. This must have been the coyote I heard howl earlier, the one thing that went after. Oh, no. I stood. Where was it now? I circled on the spot, looking out into the dark. There! On the other side of the fire, just beyond the border, where the light ended, in a familiar, reflective yellow double flash. It was still watching me. Screw you! I screamed at it. I strode into the dead coyote, grabbed it by its still warm tail, and swung it around, casting it away from the fire towards the thing. It flumped to the ground not too far away from where the light ended. The thing didn't move. I fought to get my breathing under control, kicking dust over the small patch of blood that had pooled where the coyotes lay. I looked at my hands, and they were slightly sticky with a bloody too. I grabbed my water and rinsed the worst of it off, wiping my hands on the plants to dry them. I heard a grunt and turned to see one long, impossibly long limb reaching in from the shadow to grab the dead coyote by the tail, slowly dragging it out of the lights. It was hard to see any detail, but it was almost as if it was radiating the darkness out from itself. But I could see that it seemed to end in a hands, and that again looked human, but wrong. The fingers were way too long, and they were jointed in way too many places. It looked like someone is reaching out with a collection of tarantula legs on the end of a stick. It had made a pained, soft sound while it was doing it. Maybe the light heard it? The coyote disappeared from view, leaving bloody drag marks in the dust, and I heard a horrific ripping and a squelching sounds. I guess the thing was tearing it apart and eating it, but the eating noises eventually stopped, and the thing grunted. But it sounded unsatisfying somehow. It went back to staring at me. Whatever this thing was, it wanted me, not just the coyote. I picked up some more branches and built up the fire, and then sat down and stared at the reflective eyes in the dark. I don't know how long I sat like that. It must have been hours. I built up the fire a couple more times and went back to staring at the thing. It'd grunt or growl every now and again, but then it'd shut up, for the time being. It seemed satisfying, just sitting there and staring. Eventually, I found my blinks getting longer. Each time, it was harder to open my eyes again. God, I was so tired. The adrenaline spike had long since worn off, and I felt wiped out. Just a second. I'll just close my eyes for a second, I thought to myself, as my head began to nod forward. I jerked bolt upright and wide awake at the thrill that ran up my spine as I heard a wet, throaty "Ha!" from behind me. I'd fallen asleep. The fire had burned down low. It was mostly just embers, only emitting a faint glow, just enough for me to see that the thing had crept up much closer than the light had diminished. I must have dozed off for an hour or more. Leaping to my feet, I grabbed some branches from the pile and hurled them into the remains of the fire, and then fell to my hands and knees so I could frantically blow up to the embers, desperately trying to stir them back into life. The light flared up as they caught a light, and I saw it sitting there, way too close, squatted on its hunches like a dog sitting. Long back legs folded up, so what I assumed were knees were up by the shape of its head, and arms extended down to the ground in front of it, holding its torso upright. The light glinted in its eyes as it shifted its head to stare at me again, and it hissed and pushed itself backwards, retreating from the light. As I lost sight of it in the darkness, I heard that wet sound again, like a long tongue smacking against lips. I shuddered. I got a better look in its eyes in the light this time. They were filled with hunger and pain, but there was an intelligence there. Human eyes, not entirely those of an animal. It went back to looking at me, only this time it wasn't silence. It kept growling and grunting, and the noises it was making grew in volume and frequency. It almost sounded desperate. It circled the fire, eyes disappearing from the view, and then reappearing elsewhere, where I'd hear it growl in the dark, but it never came into the firelight. I didn't say anything. I just fed the fire and hoped that my stock of firewood would hold out a little longer. I'd brought a lot in, but it was diminishing by this point. Then, finally, the thing made a noise I hadn't heard yet. A hiss, higher in pitch than anything else it had made, and it looked up at the sky before staring at me once more. It made a disgusted sort of noise, and then turned away. I heard the wind kick up, and I could smell the thing's stench again, and then all of a sudden it was just gone. As the thing went, the smell and the suffocating darkness went with it, and I realized I could see clearly around me again. The sky had that deep dark blue color, you see before the sunrise, and I could see a few pinpricks of light that could only have been stars. It got progressively lighter and lighter until... there! The sun peeked up over the horizon, and I'd never been as happy to see the light of day as I was now. I waited another hour and a half until the sun was well in the sky, and things were starting to heat up before I dared make a move. I picked up my things and got the hell out of there.